Good evening. Welcome back to Open Line. Our topic tonight, term limits. Should we have them for our lawmakers? Aaron Dukette from the group U.S. Term Limits is joining us tonight. Aaron, thank you again for being with us.
It's good to hear you.
All right, we're welcoming phone calls. As always, 615-737-PLUS is the number to call. Lucy's already called in and gotten us started. I was just taking a look at from our Facebook watchers, how they were responding to this. Every single person who has commented had said, yes, we should have term limits. I wonder what the polling shows.
Yeah, it's very true. If I wear a term limit Congress hat, I'm the most popular guy in the room. I can make friends real quickly that way. But I can tell you, so there was actually a very recent poll that was taken among likely Tennessee voters in December 2020. And they asked voters, would you support a constitutional amendment for term limits on Congress? And it was a resounding 78% of Tennessee voters want term limits on Congress. And that's very consonant with what we see in pick a state. I mean, everywhere nationally, it's right around the high 70s, low 80s in the support there. And it very interestingly, just to kind of piggyback on the last caller's discussion with us, it actually cuts across party lines. In Tennessee, the polling, if you break it down by party lines, shows that 77% of Republicans, 90% of Democrats, and 71% of independents all say that they want term limits on Congress. So it's a really kind of a unique issue in that it is really kind of cuts through typical partisan issues and seems like every issue is partisan now. Well, term limits is kind of this oddball that doesn't fit the mold. And here's how much it doesn't fit the mold. It may be the single issue, term limits on Congress, may be the single issue that both former presidents Obama and Trump agreed upon. They both favored term limits on Congress.
Wow, that is pretty significant. Okay, so that begs the question, because you covered it doesn't have to be the lawmakers voting themselves out of a job via the Constitution. That's not our only option here. So if so many people are for this, what's the issue? Why isn't this being done?
Sure, and that's my question always, right? So we know, to bring it back to what we mentioned before, the other half of Article 5 provides that states can come together to propose an amendment, but they have to have 2/3 of the states agree upon that topic to discuss and propose on. And so they have to pass legislation. It's a resolution declaring, the state of Tennessee's legislature hereby joins other states in wanting to come together for the purpose of proposing a single amendment for term limits on Congress. And so what it is, it's really a heavy lift, because if you think about that, the resolution needs to pass not only through Tennessee's legislature, but through Kentucky's legislature and 33 other state legislatures for this to happen. So that's a heavy lift. It has to go through subcommittees and committees and floor votes, right? And then the other chambers. So there's a real heavy lift here, but the good news is, that's a good thing, right? The framers were very, very wise that they didn't want the ability to propose amendments to be too easy. That would be a dangerous thing for the Constitution if amendments were too easily proposed. So that's why there's the high bar. That's why there's the high bar having a 2/3 supermajority in both chambers of Congress to propose, and the high bar for the states, arguably higher bar to get this done. And so it's a heavy lift, but with the will of the people behind it and grassroots getting activated and letting their legislatures know that they want to see this happen, it will happen. And we're seeing that this year in particular, we're really taking off. We have 4 states that have passed this resolution, and the most recent being West Virginia, that just passed this overwhelmingly with a bipartisan vote last month, became state number 4 to pass this resolution. So we have 30 more states to go. We're hoping for Tennessee to be number 5. U.S. term limits, we passed this resolution through a single chamber of 3 different state legislatures so far. We also have a lot of action going on in Arizona as well. So it's well on the move, and we're looking for the support of the people to get it done.
These don't all have to pass in the same year, do they?
Depends on the legislative rules. So in Tennessee, it's a single legislative session is stretched out over 2 years. So, we can pass one chamber in 1 year, but still be alive and passed in the second subsequent year of that session. Other states have it such that the whole session is considered 1 year.
Okay, but I guess I'm saying you don't need the 34 states within a year's time span.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you do not. So once they, state legislatures pass that resolution, it's sort of indefinite, it's sort of tabled. They actually send it to Congress as notice. We're going to do this. And so when Congress has collected 2/3 of the states applying for this, then they are constitutionally compelled to move.
Gotcha.
And we have to make this happen. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate, which seems a pretty lonely position on this issue considering the polling. But some will say that if you have term limits, you lose experience.
Sure. And while that might be true, I guess my question then becomes, what kind of experience are we talking about? Mm-hmm. In Congress, it's sometimes formulated as institutional knowledge, and so we need experienced people. But if you think about someone that you voted for that's run for their first term, are they running because you need to send me there for 20 years before I figure it out and I can be effective? No, you expect them to be effective right off the bat. And that's the same case as, in the work world too. I mean, yes, there's a learning curve for learning something, but you need to be able to adjust to it pretty quickly and be competent. And that's very possible to do. If you think about the knowledge that's necessary to be a legislator in Congress, often politicians will sort of articulate this, that we need that experience there to hold the fort and keep a professional presence. But the legislature was never meant to be a professional legislature. It should be a citizen legislature where you go and do service and come back to the people you serve and serve under the laws or live under the laws that you created.
There's also the argument that with term limits, the law of the land, lobbyists would be in charge and have their way more often.
Right. And so I would just kind of put it this way. If that were the case, then lobbyists, being lobbyists, would have lobbied for term limits to happen by now. And they don't, actually. There's been a study and a survey done among D.C. lobbyists, and they uniformly oppose term limits. In fact, Jack Abramoff, everyone remembers him. He very famously was one of the most corrupt lobbyists in history. He served jail time, and he actually put out a book, after he was out of jail about his experience. And what he said was, the last thing that I ever wanted was to have term limits, because what that would do is basically, periodically rip out a big chunk of my Rolodex, and I have to start over these whole relationships that I've been building. It's much easier for me as a high-powered lobbyist to invest in my relationships, schmooze and cozy up with the right people, have those relationships that I can rely upon for 20, 30, even 40 years, than it is if someone's going to have to be out of there after 10 years. Well, I have to start all over now. And I actually maybe have to do my job as a lobbyist and actually argue the points of what is, a good legislation or not. And so actually lobbyists, don't want term limits because it actually undermines their power. They rely upon a Congress that cozies up to them and kind of takes their perks.
Makes a lot of sense. Let's get to the phones. We have Taylor on the line. Hi, Taylor. Thanks for calling in tonight to Open Line. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are this. This sounds like such a good idea, but I actually think it's a terrible idea, and I'll tell you why.
Please do.
I'll give my example using Metro Nashville's City Council. I never worked harder on anything than I did getting that put into place, our own term limits here, but it has turned into a disaster. What happens is you have the option of getting rid of some of the best and trying to get rid of one or two that you think have been terrible over the years, but you're getting rid of dozens of very competent ones. And I can see why Obama and President Bush thought it was a good idea for term limits, because you're really giving the executive branch what they need as more power and authority, because you've got all these freshmen. Some are dedicated to the job, some are not, and couple of terms, the only thing they know about the government is where the restrooms are and what kind of pay they're going to get. There's no penalty for skipping meetings, and so I think the best thing we've got going is what we currently have. You can get rid of a bum. Now, if the state of California has a crazy person as one of their congressmen, so be it. That doesn't mean we have to turn over the entire Congress every 4 years or 2 years with new, unprepared people trying to handle a job that is too big for most of them. So there are many other points, but
Sure.
That's the main one, because I think it was a disaster at council, and I think it'd be worse in the U.S. Congress. So
Thank you,
that's
Taylor.
my thoughts.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Have a good night. Aaron, I'm going to let you respond to that.
Yeah, I appreciate the concern, the objection, and I guess what I would start to say about that is, a few things. So. Just the idea that with term limits, you'd have a lot of people that are really kind of wet behind the ears and are not competent enough to run the show correctly. I'll just pull out the example. Actually, in Florida, the Speaker of the House there in the state of Florida, in the state legislature, is actually limited to 2 years, and after that, the Speaker needs to rotate. And actually, they lead the country in fiscal solvency. And so they have actually kind of shown that actually term limits can actually be very effective. Now, in Congress, is it likely that you would have, or one and done or two and done kind of term limit? Probably not. Probably longer than that. But say there was a term limit that was passed and proposed and then ratified and said, as a member of the House of Representatives, you can't serve more than 4 terms or 5 terms, so 8-10 years. I would just kind of put it this way: if you can get the job done competently in 8-10 years, why do we need you there for 20-30? And we have a number of individuals, and they tend to head the chairmanships of committees because of their longevity. Without term limits, you have a seniority-based system where the longer you're there and the more funding that you bring in, the fundraising that you do, then that's how you get your chairmanships. It's not necessarily about you bring brilliant ideas to the table and you battle it out and then you're elected for that or appointed for that reason. And so I also think there's another dimension to what the gentleman had brought up. At the local level or state level, there's a bit of a difference in quality of term limits or the severity of the need for term limits. Now, U.S. term limits supports term limits all the way down to the town dog catcher. So we're all about it, right? But there is a qualitative difference. In the local level or at the state level, the term limits are the need is not as pronounced as it is in Congress. We have pretty consistently about 11% approval rating of Congress. From year to year to year as a whole, right? So everyone kind of thumbs down when they talk about Congress. But the re-election rate last time was 96%, and it's consistently 94, 95, 96% the re-election rate. Now, I would just put the question are we going to just simply blame the voters that they are re-electing a Congress that they thoroughly can't stand according to their polling? Well, I don't entirely say that. I think what we have is a systemic issue with the fact that the incumbency advantage is just too strong. It's just too powerful. And the rules, the winners or those who make the rules win, right? So in Congress, they can kind of structure the rules to their advantage as well. Did you know that the 50% of incumbents that run for re-election spend more using the franking privilege, so using taxpayer dime, than their challengers spend in their entire campaign trying to challenge them. So the franking privilege, just to kind of give a little background to that, it's simply if you ever get something in the mail or an email, you get reached out to you by your legislators in Congress. Here's what I've been doing. Here's the great things I've been working on in Congress. Ain't I great? Well, it's not. Is it campaigning? Yeah, I would say it is, right? But those in Congress, they get to kind of structure the rules as to what's considered campaigning. campaigning. So there's an inherent disadvantage to being a challenger, and it sort of lops on top of itself. The longer that they're there, the more entrenched that they are, the more that they have this advantage. Corporate super PACs, they give over $9 out of every $10 to challengers. I'm sorry, $9 out of every $10 to incumbents over challengers.
Wow.
So it's not even a party issue. They give to who's there. Why? Because the devil you know is better than the one you don't know, right? They want to invest in the person they've already been working with for 6-8 years. So they're going to keep them there. And the longer they're there, the more entrenched they are, the more their war chest is huge. And you just cannot, it is very difficult to surmount that. So out of fairness for elections, we need to have this happen.
Yeah, to pull back that curtain is so very interesting. We have to take another commercial break. I would love to get more callers after this. 615-737+. Stay with us.